Hello everyone, I'm Freaky and welcome to the video. My friends, I love this series slash sitcom slash comedy, Only Fools and Horses. This series is a beloved British sitcom that everybody in the country loves. I mean heck, even the younger generation knows this series, and this series came out in the 80s. Now, to those of you who don't know what this series is all about, it's basically about Del Boy and Rodney, sometimes with their granddad and sometimes with their uncle, getting into all sorts of things. And basically, they are traders, like they buy stuff and they sell stuff on the market, either that they're hooky or something else. And that's basically how they make their living. And Del Boy is always trying to figure out a way to get more money. Now, when it comes to Del Boy himself, he is possibly the most iconic British character on TV. And he's really, really funny. And there's his brother, who is smart, but unlike Del Boy, who is street smart, Rodney is, smart. And you've either got Uncle Albert or their granddad, and either of them are just as funny. My favourite is definitely Uncle Albert. Now, if you guys haven't seen Only Fools and Horses, I highly recommend you go and watch it. All the characters are so lovable and likeable, the comedy's golden, it's just a brilliant, brilliant series. But let's talk about what I'm going to do in this video. Now, I love Only Fools and Horses, and there is around 64 episodes, and nearly all of them are fan-freaking-tastic, and it does depend on your taste on which ones you like. I mean, you could say that there isn't really a bad episode in this series. Well, I mean, there is the episode A Royal Flush. I wouldn't say it's bad, it does have its funny moments, but some people actually think that this episode is the worst episode. I mean heck, David Jason, who plays Del Boy, John Sullivan, who created the series, and Ray Butt all consider that this was the worst episode within the series, because it brought out Del Boy's dark side. But yeah, I'm going off track. Everybody's going to have their opinions on which episodes of Only Fools and Horses is their favourite. And when it comes to me, I have loads of favourites when it comes to Only Fools and Horses, which is why I made this top 25 favourite episodes from Only Fools and Horses. And I just want to make one thing perfectly clear, okay? If your favourite episode of Only Fools and Horses isn't on this list, that doesn't mean it's a bad episode. It just means I prefer other episodes to yours. I mean heck, there might be some jokes in those episodes that I think is downright funny, but the rest of the episode might not be my cup of tea. So let's just say for example that I decide to make a top 20 favourite jokes from Only Fools and Horses. A joke from an episode that wasn't put into this list would be put on that list. Like for example, the episode A Touch of Glass. This episode has the funniest joke, or one of the funniest jokes within the series, and it's about a chandelier. The thing is, I like this joke, but I don't really think the episode as a whole was as good. I think it was because the joke overshadowed the rest of the episode. So yeah, it's something like that. But when it comes to this video, I'm going to be talking about the top 25 episodes, not jokes, and why the episodes as a whole was the best that Only Fools and Horses ever brought out. And so, this is the top 25 Only Fools and Horses episodes. Here we go. 3 men, a woman and a baby. Now, there are plenty of things going on in this episode. Rodney is going to go and see Cassandra, his wife. Del Boy gets a box that he thinks is full of wigs. And the most important thing in this episode is the birth of Damien Trotter, Del's son. And like I said, there are loads of things going on in this episode, and it's all funny. Del and Raquel are trying to figure out what name to give the baby, and Rodney suggested calling it Damien. And the reason why Rodney suggested calling the baby Damien is because he thinks that the baby is going to be the Antichrist. And it's really funny how he pictures the baby being the Antichrist. And then you have Del Boy, who has these boxes full of wigs, and he assumes that they're all women's wigs, but it turns out they are actually men's wigs and ponytails. And Rodney decides to put one of those ponytails on himself, and he goes to go and visit Cassandra, his wife, and they're talking on how they could fix their marriage. And Cassandra says, "You know, my ex-employer, he's only got one of those silly little ponytails," which Rodney does have one on. So while Cassandra isn't looking, he pulls it off and throws it away. And then Cassandra sees what she thinks is a rat, but it just turns out that it was the ponytail that Rodney threw away. And so Rodney pretends to capture it and throw it out, and he's seen as a hero by Cassandra. And we get this little funny moment in the pub with Trigger, and he goes to Mike saying, if it's a girl, they're going to name it Sigourney after Sigourney Weaver, and if it's a boy, they'll name it Rodney after Dave. I'm telling you, that was funny. But the highlight in this episode is the ending with Raquel giving birth to Damien. It had its funny moments, it had its beautiful moments with Del Boy and his speech at the end. It was just a brilliant episode. And also, I love how Del Boy uses a statue of a dog to comb his wigs. That was just funny. And so that's it. Let's move on to the next one. And number 19 is Mother Nature's Sons. Now, when it comes to this episode, this episode was actually based on a real incident that really happened. And it's basically Del Boy pretending that he has this spring water, but it turns out that it's just tap water. So Del Boy is basically selling tap water to the public. And if you really think about it, who knows if other restaurants who have said, here's some complimentary water. I mean, who knows? That could be tap water instead of being from a spring. And we also have this other side story where Del has to go to Grandad's old allotment and fix it up. And he comes across these barrels that has this strange substance that was in it. And they dump it in the pond. And as it turns out, that strange substance was shown within the water that Del was selling. And this was actually based on a true event that actually happened. That everybody in an area somewhere had to have all their water cut off because there was something in the water. Now, is this the funniest episode? Well, no, it's not the funniest, but it is funny. And the old part of Del Boy selling tap water, and he has this strange substance, was top notch. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is, May the Force be with you. And this is the first appearance of Roy Slater, Del Boy's arch nemesis, and he's also a police officer, and nobody likes Slater, not the police force, not even his own family. And basically what happens in this episode, Roy Slater tries to get information out of Del about a stolen microwave, and throughout the episode, he tries to get Del Boy to snitch on the person who stole this microwave. And Rodney and Grandad kept on saying to Del, no, you can't snitch, Del, you can't snitch. And there was this one part where they was interviewing Del, Rodney and Grandad, and they was given different descriptions of the guy who stole the microwave. And you know what? That part was funny. And you know what? The ending has a fantastic payoff to it. And the thing is, Del has a code of honor, and he doesn't want to snitch on anybody. Because you know, that whole snitches get stitches thing. It isn't the most memorable episode of Only Fools and Horses, but the payoff is really, really good. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next episode is Wanted. Now, when it comes to this episode, it is actually one of my favourites. My only gripe is, I just wish it was built up more. But for what it is, it's a really good episode. Anyways, the episode starts with Rodney walking back home, and he comes across this woman, and he tries to help her, and she falls down. He tries to pick her up, and she assumes that he's trying to take advantage of her, and so he runs off. And the next morning, Rodney tells Del Boy what happened last night. Now at first, Del Boy doesn't know what Rodney's talking about, and Del Boy thinks that Rodney might have been mistakenly done something wrong. But then, when he hears the name Blossom, Del Boy finds out that this woman Blossom, I think, was from the Nut House or something. And so, Del Boy decides to play a prank on Rodney, telling him that Rodney is a criminal, calling him the Peckham Pouncer. And the thing is, Rodney doesn't know any of this. Rodney thought that he did something wrong, and Del Boy plays it up, having a laugh with Rodney. And so, Rodney runs away, and later on, Del Boy finds Rodney, and, well, you guys are going to have to check out for yourself. I will say this, it was a really good ending, and Rodney got back at Del in the end. And the way that Rodney thinks that he's a criminal, and Del Boy winding him up, was just really, really funny to me. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next episode is Yellow Peril. And in this episode, Rodney, Grandad, and Del Boy goes to this takeaway, and Del Boy was asked by the owner if he could paint his kitchen, and Del Boy uses this paint that he got from Trigger. And so they paint the kitchen, and then sometime later, Trigger comes back in and gives Del Boy more paint. And apparently, this paint is used in tunnels. And Grandad says, what the heck's the point of having to paint in dark tunnels? It's pitch black, isn't it? And then Trigger says, oh no, this is just a luminous paint. And then Del Boy says, yeah, that means you can see in the dark, and goes, oh, luminous! And then he gets a call from Mr. Chin, and he tells Del Boy that his kitchen is all bright. So basically, the kitchen is now luminous. And then, later on, Del Boy just realised that he's been using this paint to paint on his mother's gravestone. And that in itself was hilarious. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next episode is Ashes to Ashes. Now, when it comes to this episode, the entire episode is just really, really funny. So basically, Del Boy buys these urns from Trigger, not knowing that there are some human ashes within these urns. And it's the ashes of Trigger's grandfather. And apparently, they have a history with Grandad. And all sorts of things happen in this episode. Del Boy is winding up Grandad with these ashes that's in these urns. And nearly through half the episode, Del and Rodney is trying to find a place to spread the ashes of Trigger's Grandad. I'm telling you guys, it is alright when it comes to this episode. The history with Grandad and Trigger's Grandad, Del Boy winding Grandad up, and them trying to get rid of the ashes. I especially like this one part, where Del Boy gets this cone, and he pretends to be the ghost of Arthur when he was talking to Grandad. I had a right giggle with that, and there was the part with the bowling club. That part was also funny. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Sleeping Dogs Lie. And in this episode, Del Boy and Rodney goes to look after Boyce's dog, and at first they're scared of the dog, and they find out that the dog has got like all sorts of steaks and sausages and lamb and all that sort of stuff. And so Duke the dog goes to live with Del for about a week or two, while Boyce and Marlene are on holiday. And then one thing leads to another. Rodney goes to take out Duke for his walk, and he's asleep in the back of Del Boy's car, and he wouldn't wake up. And Del Boy and Rodney takes Duke to the vet, and they assume that Duke has got salmonella poisoning, and Uncle Albert is told that he has to go to the hospital because he might have salmonella poisoning. And then one thing leads to another, and it turns out that Duke's okay, and Uncle Albert is also okay. And then at the end, we find out Duke has been taking Uncle Albert's sleeping pills, and Uncle Albert has been taking Duke's vitamin tablets. So really, it was just one big massive misunderstanding. It was all built up saying, oh, what's wrong with Uncle Albert, or oh, what's wrong with Duke? But it was just all one big massive misunderstanding. And it was also a really good ending. And so with that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is, the unlucky winner is... Now, when it comes to this episode, Del Boy puts one of Rodney's art pieces in a competition, and they won the competition, and they go on holiday for about, I don't know, about a week or something. And when they get to the airport, Cassandra and Rodney find out that the competition was for 12-year-olds, and Del Boy convinces the staff that Rodney is a 12-year-old. And so Cassandra, Del Boy and Rodney goes on holiday, but Rodney has to stay with the kids, and the adults can do whatever the hell they want. And every time Rodney goes off somewhere, the staff is always trying to bring him back. So throughout the entire holiday, Rodney has to pretend to be a 12-year-old, otherwise they're going to be in big trouble about it. And I love this one joke where Rodney is smoking and drinking, and the staff comes in asking where Rodney is, and then Del Boy goes to Rodney and takes his alcohol and his cigarette. I just thought that was absolutely hilarious. I mean, this whole idea of him just pretending to be a 12-year-old just gets me every single time, and Rodney can't do anything about it because they're always pulling him back, while Cassandra and Del is off doing their own thing. It is one of the best episodes. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Stage Fright. And in this episode, Del Boy is looking for a singer that will sing alongside Raquel. And yeah, he's basically doing it for the money. Del Boy was given the job of entertaining this club manager's mother on her birthday. And so, Del Boy gets Raquel and a singer called Tony. And so, Del Boy gets Tony on board, and he and Raquel goes on stage singing Crying. And Raquel sings first, and then Tony comes in and he starts singing, and he's singing and singing, and then it gets to this one part, and he says, crying, crying. So yeah, it's basically the song Crying, but Tony can't pronounce his R's. And this is all on stage for everybody to see. I mean, that part was the absolute 100% best part of the episode. It was definitely worth the wait, and definitely worth the build-up. Loads of fun. I highly recommend it. And so with that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Video Nasty. I really love this episode, and basically it's about Rodney, and he's been given a budget on a film project that he's working on, and everybody wants in on the action. Boise, Trigger, even the vicar, and near the end, Mickey makes a porno in Del Boy's flat, and Rodney is caught up in it, and there is a funny payoff near the end with it. But my absolute favourite part within this episode is when Rodney is trying to think of a story to write, and then Del Boy comes in and says, hey listen, I've got a great idea for a story for you. And Rodney says, okay, what is it? And Del Boy says, the movie is called There Is a Rhino Loose in the City. And I'm telling you guys something, this part was really, really funny, and I just love how he just describes the movie about a rhino loose in the city, and Rodney is just gobsmacked on how stupid the idea of a rhino loose in the city is. And for me, I just love the details that Del Boy brings up, and I just love how Rodney debunks and points out all the flaws with the movie. It's just that one part of the episode that just gets me every single time. And so with that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Hole in One. And in this episode, the Trotters are going through some money problems, and they don't know what to do. And so, one thing leads to another, and Uncle Albert falls down into the pub cellar. And then Del Boy gets the idea of suing the brewery. And even though the brewery wanted to settle it out in court by giving them money, Del Boy says, no, we need more. And then they go to court, and one thing leads to another, and Uncle Albert is on the stand, and he's asked all these questions like, are you the same trotter who fell down this hole? Are you the same trotter that fell down this hole? Are you the same trotter that fell down this hole? So yeah, basically, Uncle Albert is a con man. He's been falling down holes just to get some money out of people, and he's been doing this for years. And the reason why he did it this time was so that he could get his brother, aka Grandad's tombstone. And so Rodney and Delboy forgives Uncle Albert and they make their way home. And this is the second episode that has Uncle Albert. And you know what? It was a great episode with Uncle Albert in it. And so that's it. Let's move on to the next one. And the next one is It Never Rains. And when it comes to this episode, Delboy, Rodney and Grandad are going on all day to Spain. And Grandad is reluctant to go, but he decides to go in the end. And they're having a good time. All's going well. And then Grandad gets arrested and Delboy and Rodney goes in to see if they can try and get him out. And here's the funny part. Grandad talks about his part in the Spanish War. And he goes on talking about that there were gun traffickers. And he goes on saying that, oh, we did it because we needed the money, and so on and so on. And when the Spanish authorities caught Grandad and his friend, they deported them back to England. And that was probably the reason why Grandad was locked up, because he came back to Spain. And Delboy tries to bribe the security guard and he asked him, please, could you let my Grandad out? And the security guard says, yeah, okay, he can go. Here's his release papers. So they were going to release Grandad anyways. And the reason why he's in the slammer is because he was done for jaywalking, and it had nothing to do with the gun smuggling, and that's all it was. And that was the funniest part in this episode. I just love the exposition and chats about the past within the series. I mean, it's really, really good. Best part of the episode is when Grandad is in the slammer and he's talking. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Who's a Pretty Boy? And in this episode, Delboy is given the job to go and paint Denzel's house. And so they're given the job to paint Denzel's front room. And as soon as they get there, Grandad is eating the Jaffa cakes. Delboy is talking to a friend that's in Canada, and Rodney leaves the kettle on the stove for like about an half an hour or something. And then when they go into the kitchen, the entire kitchen looks like a Turkish bath. It's all steaming and all wet. I also forgot to mention that Denzel's wife has a canary for a pet, and it was left in the kitchen. And when they do go into the kitchen and Grandad picks up the birdcage, they find that the canary is dead. And all this is happening while Denzel and his wife is out. So Delboy tells Grandad to go buy some Jaffa cakes and a canary, while Del and Rodney tries to clean up the place. And the old part with the canary is just freaking, well, hilarious. I just love it. And the best part is, near the end, Grandad gets a new canary, hoping Denzel's wife won't tell the difference. And so Rodney, Grandad and Delboy gets back to work as Denzel's wife comes back, and she goes into the kitchen and Rodney says, she's going to tweak it, isn't she? She's going to tweak it, she's going to tweak it. And Delboy says, there is no way she is going to know that it's not her canary. And then she goes, what happened to my canary? And so Delboy, Grandad and Rodney goes into the kitchen and she says, look, pointing at the bird. And Grandad says, he seems alright. And Rodney says, yeah, there's nothing wrong with him. And Delboy says, yeah, he's hopping about all over the place like a good one. And Denzel's wife says, yes, I know that, but when I woke up this morning, he was dead. So it wasn't the steam that killed the bird. He was already dead. And that part gets me every single time. It's just that funny. They went through all that, spent all that money, and it was all for nothing. I just love the part when she says, yes, I know that, but when I woke up this morning, he was dead. It just comes right out the hell out of nowhere. It's that funny. Oh, brilliant episode. Love it. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is The Russians Are Coming. Now, I'm going to say this. This isn't the funniest episode. It's not the saddest episode. But I would say that it's one of the deep episodes. And basically, it's about Delboy. And he finds this lead bomb shelter. And at first, Delboy wants to sell the lead so they can get money. And then Rodney says, here's an idea, let's keep it. And one thing leads to another. So they build the bomb shelter and they talk about all sorts of stuff while they're in this thing. Talking about how long will they need to stay in the bomb shelter. And they talk about war. And they talk about how the Russians are going to start a war. Yeah, I know. It's too close to home. I know. I do apologise. But like I said, it isn't one of the funniest episodes, but it is one of the episodes that talks about topics like war. And yeah, there are a few laughs there and there. And some people might think this episode isn't that funny, but you know what? I really do like this episode. I like the new location. I like the deep talks about how terrible war is. And it does have a few funny moments there and there. It's just one of those episodes that just sticks with you. Some might say that it's a bit of a downer, but you know what? It's still enjoyable. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is The Miracle of Peckham. And when it comes to this episode, when Delboy goes to a church to confess his sins or something, the priest sees that the Virgin Mary is crying. And Delboy says, hey, we can make money out of this. And while that's going on, Rodney accidentally destroyed a trumpet that belonged to somebody else. Anyways, the news people come around, and in order for the news people to come and have a look at the miracle, they says, okay, listen, you can have a look at this miracle, but you have to pay this much. And the reason why Delboy is trying to charge people is so that he can save the church. And then the priest and somebody else was talking, and the priest says Del predicts when the miracle happens, and it happens every time it rains. And then the priest puts 2 and 2 together, and he finds out that his roof, which I think is full of lead, is gone. And so this was the sin that Del was talking about to the priest earlier on in the episode, that he purchased from the man who stole those lead toll things that was on the church. So you could say that Del was doing this Miracle of Peckham thing for the greater good, in order to save the church and do things that's right. It's not the funniest, but it just shows how much of a good person Del is. Yeah, he can be a scoundrel there and there, but Del does have a good heart, and he did this miracle thing all for the church, all because he felt guilty about it. Definitely an episode that's worth watching. And so that's it, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Danger, UXD. Now this is one of the funniest episodes that Only Fools and Horses has ever brought out. And basically, Del Boy gets these inflatable dolls, or sex dolls, and there's all different sorts of laughs when it comes to this episode. From finding out what Del's got, which was the dolls, to finding out that these dolls explode. And this episode had me in stitches, and every time that these dolls were on the screen, it was just such a huge laugh. And the problem with the dolls is, they have been filled with a gas that explodes, and Del and Rodney doesn't know about this till the end of the episode. I think my favourite moment with these dolls is when we're introduced to them, and Rodney is explaining to Uncle Albert on what these things are, and Rodney says, you get these dolls from magazines, and Uncle Albert says, where's that Radio Times? Uncle Albert is so innocent, and Rodney says, Albert, have a day off, would ya? I mean, seedy magazines for kinky, sleazy little men. And Uncle Albert says, you're pulling my leg. And then Rodney says, oh, am I? And Rodney pulls out one of those seedy magazines and shows Albert. For me, that was just freaking hilarious. The entire episode is really, really funny. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next episode is Strained Relations. And this is the first episode that brings in Uncle Albert. And this is also the episode of where they bury Grandad. Now, Grandad and Uncle Albert are brothers. Just want to throw that in there. And this is a very sad episode. Rodney's grieving, Del Boy's grieving in his own way, and some people might say that, oh, they don't want to see anything that's sad and gloomy, but if you ask me, I think this was a perfect episode, and it shows us the grief of what Del Boy's gone through. And not only that, Uncle Albert was left behind by his relatives, and he doesn't have anywhere else to go. And at first, Del Boy doesn't want Uncle Albert to stay there at their flat because of all the grief he had with his dad leaving, his mom died, and recently Grandad died. And also, Del Boy also assumes that Uncle Albert would be like his father, and as we saw through the series, Uncle Albert is actually a really good man. And in the end, he goes to live with Del Boy and Rodney. It's a sad episode, but it's also a heartwarming episode. It is really, really good. And so that's it. Let's move on to the next one. And the next one is The Jolly Boys Outing. Now, when it comes to this episode feels very, very British. Something like people would used to do back in the day, in the 80s, the 90s. Like having all your mates go on this little bus trip to a certain destination. And you know what? It was really nice. And that's one of the things that I like about this episode. But there's other things in this episode that's also funny. Like Cassandra's boss being in this episode. And there's also Raquel's return in this episode. And the biggest laugh of them all when it comes to this episode is when their coach gets blown up. And then later on, all 25 of them has to go looking around trying to find hotels to sleep for the night. It is a great episode. The ending, funny, it's enjoyable to watch. The entire thing's really, really funny. And there's been loads of people saying that, oh, this is their #1 episode when it comes to Only Fools and Horses. I mean, yeah, don't get me wrong, it is a good episode. But I would say it's somewhere in the top 10s, in my opinion. I love Denzel in this, I love Boise in this, I love Trigger in this. It's just so nice to see all the lads go on this trip and just enjoy themselves. Great episode, I love it. And so, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Friday the 14th. Yeah, you're probably guessing what this title is, Paradink. So basically, it's about Del, Rodney and Grandad going on a fishing trip to go and fish for salmon. And they go to Boise's cottage. And on the way there, they are told by the police that there's a psycho on the moors that escaped from an asylum. And they're trying to find him. Now, you could say that this episode is the spooky episode, but at the same time, it is pretty damn funny. And throughout the episode, Rodney thinks that the psycho is out there somewhere, and he's too scared to check anything. And the best part is near the end, and they find out that a policeman is actually the psycho, and Del Boy is at the cottage all alone with him. I definitely think that this is the darker episode, but again, it's also pretty damn funny. They're like having a game of Monopoly, they meet with a psycho that's dressed up as a copper, and Del Boy is trying his best to keep him happy until the police finally comes and helps him. I love the part where the psycho says, "Is that a police helicopter?" And Del Boy says, "No, you're alright. it's Barrett's. I'm telling you, that part just got me in the stitches. And so, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is a losing streak. And in this episode, Boise and Del Boy is playing a game of poker, and they're using actual money in this. And earlier on in the episode, Del Boy gets this two-headed coin from Grandad, and Del Boy thinks that he can pull a fast one thanks to this two-headed coin, and he loses every single time when he uses it. And again, the ending of this episode is also funny too. But my favourite part has always been the part when Del Boy and Boise is playing poker. It's funny, but it's also intense as well. Especially when Del Boy bets everything he owns, everything in the flat, his clothes, everything, just to meet with Boise's hand. And Del Boy gets the last laugh when he's playing the game of poker with Boise. And I also like the mood of this episode because even though it's funny and suspenseful, it's also relaxing as well. In fact, I think this was my very first episode of Only Fools and Horses, if I remember correctly. Yeah, this was my introduction to Only Fools and Horses. And you know what? That's why I love this episode. It was my introduction to Only Fools and Horses. And you know what? I thought it was great, especially the part when Del Boy calls Rodney and Rodney says, "Tails." I mean, that had me in stitches. And so, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is The Longest Night. Now, when it comes to this episode, it is actually one of my favourite episodes of Only Fools and Horses. Now, when it comes to series and sitcoms, they're always in the same place. Either they're at the flat, or the pub, or at work, or etc, etc. And when it comes to this episode, all the characters are all in one place, and they're trapped there. And you know what? I've always had this fascination when it comes to characters being trapped in one place. Like for example, in the series Bottom, where Richie and Eddie is trapped on a Ferris wheel. And when it comes to this episode, Del Boy, Uncle Albert, and Ed Rodney are all held up at gunpoint in this shop, alongside with the security guard and the CEO of the shop. And they're all trapped in this office, and the robber wants to rob this safe that's housing £60,000. And they're trapped in the office for the rest of the night because the safe is on a timer and it can't be opened until the next morning. And so the robber, the CEO, the security guard, and the trotters are forced to stay in this little space or room for the whole night until the morning. And then when the morning comes, the robber actually recognises Del, and Del recognises the robber. And this is somebody that Del Boy knows. And you know, they start chatting, saying, "Oh, how you been? How's your mom?" That sort of stuff. And Del Boy tries to get Lennox to give himself up, saying, "Oh, we know your name, your address, and your mom's shoe size." And he also tells Lennox that he has to get somebody to let him out, etc, etc. And then one thing leads to another, and Del even offers Lennox help by saying that he would vouch for him in court. And then Lennox shouts at the CEO, saying, "You said this would be easy!" And so it turns out that the CEO was in on it, and also the security guard was also in on it as well. And they go through all the details as to why they're doing it, how they could do it, the lot. For me, I just love the exposition in this episode. And I think my favourite funny part in this episode is when Lennox is asleep and he leaves the gun on the desk, and Rodney looks like he's about to reach for the gun, but he was actually reaching for the cigarettes. I mean, that was a really funny moment. And also, true story, this episode was also based on a true event that actually happened. So yeah, you learn something new every day. I really love this episode. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next episode is Heroes and Villains. And all sorts of things happen in this episode. Rodney gets an identity bracelet from Del for his birthday. Rodney has a nightmare of his nephew Damien being the ruler of the world. Rodney has to keep Cassandra's specimen in a nice, dark, cool place. Del Boy has asked for a grant from the council, and near the end, there's this gang of muggers that gets taken down by Del and Rodney. Like, as a whole, it really doesn't have like a direction of where it wants to go. Like, sometimes, it just feels like it's a show about nothing. But at the same time, it feels like something is happening. Almost like you're seeing the Trotters' everyday life. Now, this whole episode is funny and good, and I do like the fact that it feels like it's a show about nothing. But my absolute favourite part of this episode is when Del Boy and Rodney dresses up as Batman and Robin, and they're in the car and it breaks down. So they have no choice but to run to the costume party on foot in the middle of the night. And while they're doing that, these muggers tries to rob a councilman, and then Del Boy and Rodney runs out of the smoke while the Batman and Robin theme is playing, and then the muggers went, "Go, run away!" And then Del Boy sees the councilman and he tries to have a chat with her, and Rodney, who is dressed up as Robin, he goes, "Del!" and he hits his hand and says, "Let's go!" and they carry on running to the costume party. And I'm telling you guys something, that was the freaking funniest thing, or one of the most funniest things that Only Fools and Horses brought out. This part of the episode was just the best. Brilliant episode. And so with that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Chain Gang. This is possibly one of the most well thought out episodes in Only Fools and Horses, and I just love the interactions the characters have with each other. Boise, Trigger, Mike, Uncle Albert, Rodney, Del Boy. Their interactions are just really, really great. So basically, in this episode, Rodney, Del Boy, Trigger, Mike, and Boise makes a deal with this guy called Arnie, because Arnie have these golden chains that's worth 25 grand. Now, it will take me a long time to explain what the heck is going on in this episode, so I highly recommend you guys go and check out the episode, and you'll see what Del Boy and the rest of the characters are doing with these gold chains. And so, one thing leads to another. Arnie gets Del Boy buys the gold chains, and then they decide to sell the gold chains to this Mr. Stavros guy. And Arnie says, okay, let's go. They get to the restaurant, and then Arnie has a heart attack, and he's taken away in an ambulance with the money and the gold. And back at the flat, Del Boy and everybody else is waiting for Arnie, or somebody else to call him. And then Rodney and Uncle Albert comes back, and they said that they lost the ambulance that Arnie was in. And this part is one of my favourite parts of the episode. And this is the part where they're trying to think of where they can find Arnie, or Arnie's wife. Oh, let's have a look at the members club. Oh, let's check out his council registration. Or, oh, let's check every single hospital. And every time they get an idea as to how they could find Arnie, they always shoot each other down, saying, oh, he wasn't a member, or, oh, I can't remember his last name, and so on and so on. And then later on, everybody finds out that Arnie is a con man. He's alive, and he's been conning people out of their money with the gold chains, the ambulance, and the group talks about how Arnie did it, like Arnie's kids is the ambulance men, and so on and so on. And then later on, they find out that Denzel is also going to buy Arnie's chains, and at the end of the episode, they capture Arnie in the most funniest way possible. It was a great episode. The interactions, Arnie's plan, the funny moments were great. It was just all around great. And so that said, let's move on to the next one. And the next one is Time on Our Hands. And this was supposed to be the last episode of Only Fools and Horses until they brought it back in 2001. Now, there has been loads of people saying that, oh, the series should have ended here, and they shouldn't have brought it back in 2001. And you know what? To a degree, I do believe that the series should have ended on this episode, but the next 3 episodes does clear up a few things, so they do have their good sides to them. But if you ask me, I think this is one of the best episodes of Only Fools and Horses. Because in this episode, Rodney is still upset because he and Cassandra lost their baby. And Del Boy tries to comfort Rodney in this episode. And when they get trapped in the lift, Rodney has no choice but to talk about how upset he was when Cassandra lost the baby. And after Rodney confessed on how he felt about it, it was shown that Del Boy actually made the lifts stop on purpose, so he could make Rodney talk about his feelings and how he felt about losing his baby. And that was a tender moment. In fact, I think there's about another 3 moments like this in the episode. They were more like sad, happy moments. But the biggest one that makes this episode so special is that the Trotters have this very, very valuable watch that's worth over £6 million. That's like over £14 million in today's money. Anyways, throughout the entire series of Only Fools and Horses, Del Boy always says that one day we will be millionaires. Same time next year, we will be millionaires. That was sort of his catchphrase. And you know what? They did it. After seeing the Trotters go through the entire series, you're just so glad that Del Boy and Rodney finally did it. That they were millionaires. You just couldn't help but feel happy for Del Boy and Rodney when they finally became millionaires. And even though Del Boy has finally made it, but near the end of the episode, Del Boy feels sad that he doesn't need to trade anymore because he said it himself that, oh, I've always wanted to be a millionaire. I've always wanted it. But now that I've got it, I feel empty or something like that. What I'm trying to say is that Del Boy loved the chase, the challenge. He loved to chase his dream of wanting to be a millionaire. So really, you kind of feel sad for Del Boy because, in a way, he did love the challenge, the chase, and chasing that dream of wanting to be a millionaire. But he doesn't need to chase that dream anymore. He doesn't need to scrounge for money anymore. In a way, it's sad, but at the same time, you know he's going to do something with that money. And you know what? This is the episode that should have ended the series. Like Rodney, Uncle Albert, and are going off into the sunset. I mean, come on, that was a perfect ending for the series. And then the specials came along and they lost their fortune. And it was really, really sad that they lost their fortune. But hey, that's for another video for another time. A brilliant episode that should have ended the series. And so that said, let's move on to the final episode. And number 1 is The Frog's Legacy. I absolutely love this episode. There is so many laughs. There's so much exposition of them talking about the past. And there's also a mystery to this episode. And also, this is the episode that saved the last 3 episodes of Only Fools and Horses. Well, in my opinion, this series gives us more depth to the characters, and it also gives us some ideas about the Trotter's mom and a little bit of history about a crook named Freddy the Frog, especially Freddy the Frog. I mean, look at the title. It says The Frog's Legacy. And basically, what happens in this episode is that Del is invited to a wedding, and he meets up with a woman that used to be friends with Del's mom. I believe her name was Aunt Rini, and at the wedding, she starts talking about the missing gold and how Del Boy and Rodney would have been set for life. And she goes on talking about Freddy Robdell, or aka Freddy the Frog, and she tells Del about how Freddy used to be a thief. He would steal paintings and stuff like that, and he also stole hundreds of thousands of gold bullion. And when Freddy died, all the paintings and things they stolen was given back to its rightful owners, all except for the gold, because nobody knew where Freddy hid it. And the gold bullion's value is somewhere around £1 million to £2 million. And after hearing this story, throughout the episode, Delboy tries to find more information on Freddy. And the biggest eye-opener in this episode is at the flat, and Delboy says, I've been hearing rumours that Freddy the Frog had a son, and at the beginning of the mystery of Freddy, it was said that the Trotter's mother was a friend of Freddy's, and Rodney was surprised to hear this news. And you know what? The audience put 2 and 2 together, and it was hinted that maybe Rodney is Freddy the Frog's son. I mean, heck, even Aunt Rini says that the likeness is uncanny. Anyways, throughout the episode, the Trotters have been trying to figure out where Freddy hid his gold bullion. Delboy had a little bit of information. Rodney found a little bit of information when he was sorting out the Undertaker's stuff. Rodney found out that Freddy the Frog ordered a coffin for a certain somebody, but it was said that he, Freddy the Frog, actually put the gold bullion inside the coffin. And you know what? This part of the episode is where they talk about like how Freddy did it and how he managed to get the proper papers to get it all signed off, and they're one step closer to finding the gold. And then Delboy goes to the vicar to get the computer money that he sold to the vicar. And the vicar started talking about Freddy the Frog, saying, oh, I was the one who put his friend to rest. And Derek finally finds out where the gold is buried. He goes outside and he tells Uncle Albert and Rodney to follow him. They go over a gate, and Delboy says, well, this is where he buried it. And he points out to the sea. And Delboy explains that Freddy the Frog was a deep sea diver or frogman. Okay, the way I'm saying it, it sounds boring. But if you guys was to watch this episode, and if you guys was to listen as to what these characters are talking about, you would find it very, very, very interesting. The mystery with Freddy the Frog, the mystery with the gold bullion, and the mystery and the hinting that Rodney is Freddy the Frog's son. I mean, at the end of the episode, Rodney asks Uncle Albert, do I look like him? And Uncle Albert says, it's just a rumour. And he asks again, do I look like him? And Uncle Albert says, a bit. So it is hinted that Uncle Albert might have known this whole time, but he just didn't want to say anything in order to protect Del and Rodney. Now listen, some people will say that these other episodes are more funnier than The Frog's Legacy, or they might have sadder episodes than this episode, but for me, this was the perfect episode of Only Fools and Horses. It brought things to light, it gave us a mystery that even we the audience was invested in. The exposition is fantastic, the jokes are great, and like I said, for me, this was the episode that saved the last 3 episodes, or more specifically, the last episode of Only Fools and Horses, because in the final episode, when Delboy and Rodney was about to lose their home, they find out that Uncle Albert invested into something, and he left all his money to Del and Rodney. And near the end, at the gravesite, Rodney asks Delboy if he's anything like Freddy the Frog, his father. Now, when it came to this point, well, before this point, both Rodney and Del knew that Freddy the Frog was Rodney's father, but Rodney and Del didn't want the other to know because they was afraid of breaking each other's hearts. But when it came to this point at the gravesite, near the end of the episode, and Rodney asks this question about Freddy the Frog, that is he anything like him? And Delboy says, Freddy the Frog was a homewrecker, a thief, a cheat, and he talks about all these horrible things that Freddy did. And he tells Rodney, no, you're nothing like him, Rodney. And the two brothers just walk off, finally giving the series closure. Now, I will say this, if The Frog's Legacy was never made, and the final episode of Only Fools and Horses brought in Freddy the Frog, I don't think those 3 final episodes could have been saved. But it's all thanks to this episode that the final episode was kind of saved. I mean, the 1996 final episode, Time on Our Hands, was a perfect ending to the series, but the final episode gave us closure. And you know what? There is nothing wrong with this episode. It was just a perfect episode that sort of saved the last episode of Only Fools and Horses. For me, this was just a perfect perfect episode. It kind of reminds me of Cowboy Bebop in a way. Like, all the characters have this past, like exciting pasts, and in the end they confront their pasts, and in a way, the Trotters in this episode kind of does that, confront the past, especially in the final episode of Only Fools and Horses. Only Fools and Horses is one of the greatest comedy sitcoms of all time. Now, I can understand why some people want to see drama and epic storylines and all that stuff, and Only Fools and Horses doesn't have any epic storytelling and space battles or big massive epic dramas, but instead it has great characters that you can't help but love, and nearly all the characters are absolutely lovable. Del Boy, Rodney, Uncle Albert, Grandad, Trigger, Boise, Mike, Denzel, heck, even Slater, despite being scum, has a funny moment there or two. It's all about the characters and all the stuff they get into, but they always make a joke about the situations that they're in. Well, not purposely. I will always treasure this series. It's very British. The older and younger generation can watch it and enjoy it. The characters are lovable, the jokes are fantastic, and when the sad moments come up, you feel sad too. And listen, I highly recommend you guys go and check out Only Fools and Horses if you haven't seen it. And all these episodes that I've talked about on this video are the ones I recommend you guys go and check out. They will be at least a starting point for you guys to start, and then you can work yourself way up all the way to 64 episodes. And also, don't forget to check out its prequel, Rocks and Chips. This was the last series that John Sullivan ever created. He only made 3 episodes, and sadly in the year 2011, he died without finishing the series. But you know what, hey, that's okay. I don't mind things being in a exposition instead of those stories about the past being shown to us, if you know what I mean. For me, I think it's best to leave things to our imaginations. And listen, everything on this list was only my opinion, and if your favourite episode isn't on this list, then that's fine. Only because your favourite episode isn't on this list doesn't mean it isn't as good as my favourite episodes. So if you're an Only Fools and Horses fan, please let me know in the comment section below and tell me what is your favourite Only Fools and Horses episode and why. And again, if you guys haven't seen Only Fools and Horses, I highly recommend you guys go and check it out. And again, these episodes can be a starting point of where to start, and they're all episodic, which means you don't need to watch them in order, but it does help a little bit if you do watch the very first episode all the way to the last episode, so that way you'll get to know the characters more, and by doing that it will help you warm up to the characters more. So yeah, that's all I gotta say. So what do you guys think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Have you watched Only Fools and Horses? What's your favourite episode? Are you planning on watching Only Fools and Horses? Please let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. I'm Freaky. Peace out. And please don't forget to check out my other social medias. Please go and check out my alternative video platforms, Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Twitch, and please come and hang out on my Discord server. We can play games, have a movie night or a series night, or you can watch me play a few games. And if you guys have any suggestions of any videos you want me to react to, or any video ideas in general, you can tell me on my Discord. I'm also on Twitter, Gab, Getter, and Parler. I'm on Locals, Tumblr, Minds, and if you guys want to support me, please go and check out my Subscribestar. It's like Patreon but better. All these things are in the description box below, so please go and check them out and subscribe to them. I'm Geek Freak. Peace out.